Today's daf is daf Ches, and we're up to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. The Gemara here is going back to the stira between the two brisos that we had on daf Zayin Amid Beis. According to one brisa, if someone brings a get from a boat on a river in Eretz Yisrael, he does not have to say B'fanei nechtam, it's Kamevi Eretz Yisrael. And according to the second brisa, it has the din of chutzarts, and he has to proclaim b'fanei nechtam. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Omar. As far as this get on a boat is concerned, b'naharos Eretz Yisrael, to kuli alma lo pligi, there's no machlok shina tanoim. Everybody unanimously agrees that the get is considered as if it were written in Eretz Yisrael. And even though this machlokas as far as Trumas and Maisus is concerned, with regard to a Sfina She'ena Gosheshes, but nevertheless, we're not going to derive any conclusions from the dinim of Trumas and Maisus or Shvius, which depends upon the Yanika and how much it nourishes from the Karka, to the din of Get. It's not analogous, because the din of Get depends upon the Tchumin of Eretz Yisrael, and these rivers are within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the din of the get is that of a get that was written in Eretz Yisrael. Elaki pligi, the machlokis here between these two brisos is with regard to a boat that is found b'yam hagadol. That's where we have a machlokis tanoim. Now we'll see in the brisa that's going to be brought here in the Gemara that there's going to be a machlokes tanoim with regard to those places that are in the Yam HaGadol. Are they considered Eretz Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz? And the debate revolves around the following questions. How do we determine and establish the bounds on the western side of Eretz Yisrael, which is where the Mediterranean is? And the two brisos that are going to be quoted here are dealing with this issue of a get that was written in one of the various places that's going to be listed here, enumerated as a machlokas tanoim. And one brisa holds like that Tana, whose opinion is that the makom, whatever that makom is, we'll see the list, has the din of Eretz Yisrael, and there's no need for b'fanei nechtam. There's another brisa, second brisa, that holds, and we've already quoted that second brisa, it holds like that Tana, according to his view, that makom has the status of chutzars, and the shaliach is therefore required to recite b'fanei nechtam. So here's the brisa that is going to record a machlokes tanoim as far as the western boundary of Eretz Yisrael. And this brisa is a tosefta in the second parak of Trumas. Ezehu eretz v'ezu chutzars. What is considered the bounds of Eretz Yisrael, beyond which it becomes Chutz La'aretz. And now we're talking about the northern side of Eretz Yisrael, where the pasuk says about Midbar Perek Lamed Daled, V'hoya lachem hayom hagadol, u'gvul ze yeh lachem gvul yom, which means that the western boundary of Eretz Yisrael is the sea. And the very next pasuk in Bamidbar Lamed Daled, it says, Min hayom hagadol tisa'u lachem har hahar, which means that the western boundary of Eretz Yisrael stretches all the way to the northwestern corner, and there it is har hahar, which in the language of the Tanoim is called Turei Amnon. And that's what Rashi says here in the name of the Targum Yerushalmi. Har hahar is Turei Amnon. So we're going to derive from this that the har, which is called Turei Amnon, is right next to the Yam. It's on the sea. And this har has a shipua. In other words, on the western side, it goes down towards the water, towards the sea. And so too, it has a slope going down in the south and a slope in the north. And from this pasuk, we derive that only on the northern boundary do we find that over B'turei Amnon, so on the Gvul Tzfoni, over B'turei Amnon. And we have to know if this Gvul Tzfoni, if this northern border goes onto the top of the mountain or to the foot of the mountain, at the bottom of the Shipua on the southern side. And the Tana is going to teach us now that the northern boundary passes through the head and extends to the head at the top of the mountain from the west to the east. And therefore, Kol Sheshofea v'yored mituri Amnon v'lifnim, the entire slope of Harahar or Turi Amnon towards the southern direction and beyond is Eretz Yisrael. But mituri Amnon v'lachutz, but on the other hand, the slope on the other side of Turi Amnon, on the other side of the mountain towards the north, from there on, it's called Chutz La'aretz. And that's the pshat of Rashi here, Dibra Masel Ezuhi, as far as the first part of this brisa. So the northern boundary passes over the top of the mountain of Turi Amnon, and the entire slope on the southern side is all part of Eretz Yisrael. And we have here in the Masifta a diagram in which he charts this all out. And Tosas, Dira Maschel Kol, this long Tosas here, writes that Rashi derived this from the Pasuk, which is coming to define the northern border, and it says, Ze yeh lachem gvul tzafon min hayam hagadol lachem chara. So Rashi understands that the intention is that from the Yam HaGadol, if you turn towards the east, you will come to the Harahar, which is Turi Amnon, and Turi Amnon is going to be the northern border of Eretz Yisrael. Now later on, we'll get to the last part of the brisa, and Tosas is going to use the last part of the brisa as a kash on Rashi's pshat. Now the brisa continues to speak about the western boundary of Eretz Yisrael. And until now, we've been speaking about the northern boundary. So based on the pasuk, the boundary on the western side is the Yam HaGadol, is the sea itself. And therefore, the northwestern point is the Sfas Hayam. And at the foot of Turi Amnon, at the bottom of the Shipua of the slope moving towards the west, which is basically Mimul, it's opposite the middle of the mountain, which is over Ligvul Tzafon, we could have said that from that point and on is the Gvul Ma'aravi, is the western boundary of Eretz Yisrael, going towards the up and down Sfas Hayam, going south. But then any islands that were in the Yam would be Chutz La'aretz. Therefore, the Brisa tells you that that's not so. And from the pasuk, we're going to derive a different conclusion, as we'll soon see. Hanisin Shabayam, these are the islands in the sea. Roim Osam, Kiluchut Masuach Aleim, Mituri Amnon Ad Nachal Mitzrayim. Notice we see them as if there's a string, a rope that is stretched from the point which is the middle of the Sfas Hayam to the foot of Turi Amnon, and corresponds to the highest point of the mountain, going all the way to Nachal Mitzrayim, which is the western boundary on the southern side. So that all the islands that are located Minachut Ulifnim, from that imaginary line going towards the inside of that line, meaning towards the direction of Eretz Yisrael, that's Eretz Yisrael. But any island that is found minachut v'lachutz, being beyond the outer point of the chutz, of that imaginary line, that's chutz la'aretz. So in this diagram here, he has this imaginary line here that he draws, going from Turei Amnon all the way down to Nachal Mitzrayim in the south, and this imaginary line really cuts through the sea, right, the Mediterranean, and you'll see there are, shall we say, islands in the sea towards the eastern side, that's part of Eretz Yisrael, whereas the islands on the western side of this line, of this imaginary line, are considered chutz la'aretz. Okay. You know, he adds a few things here in this diagram, right? Again, everything we're doing now is the Tanakama, and this is a line that goes from Turei Amnon straight down to Nachal Mitzrayim on the southwestern side. Now we get to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol shekeneged Eretz Yisrael, any area within the Yam HaGadol that is directly opposite Eretz Yisrael on the western side is Hareu Eretz Yisrael. So he's got a broader, all-encompassing area of Eretz Yisrael on the west, Shenemar, because the pasuk again in Bamidbar Lamidal says, Ugvul Yom, Vayolachem Hayom HaGadol, Ugvul Ze Yelachem Gvul Yam. So it says in the pasuk Hayom HaGadol Ugvul, and that establishes that the Yam is the western Gvul of Eretz Yisrael. And the word Ugvul here is totally superfluous, because at the beginning of the pasuk it says Ugvul Yam Vayolachem Hayom HaGadol. So we already learned from the earlier part of the pasuk that the western boundary is the Yam. So from this Yitur Lashon, this extra language, Rabbi Yehuda derives the conclusion that the Yam HaGadol is going to establish the Gvul. And that the Yam HaGadol is on the inside of the Gvul, meaning it's Keneged Eretz Yisrael, it's Mul Eretz Yisrael, but it's included in the Tchum of Eretz Yisrael. And this goes all the way down to the Okinus, to the Atlantic Ocean. And according to this, all the islands, all of them that are parallel to Eretz Yisrael on the western side in the Mediterranean, they have the status of Eretz Yisrael. Anything that grows there is chayiv in the mitzvah tzliyus ba'aretz. Anisim shebitzdadim. However, there are islands that are not mul Eretz Yisrael, but rather on the sides. Like, for example, there are islands to the north or to the south of the area of the Yam that is mul Eretz Yisrael. Romoson, we see them, ke'ilu chut masuach alehem mikifluria ad Yam Okinus. Now, Kifluria is a city that is located on the top, on the summit of Tur Amnon. And we're going to draw an imaginary line, according to Rabbi Yehuda, down towards the west, all the way to the Yam Okinus. And that's going to be the northern boundary of the Mediterranean. Uminachal Mitzrayim, which is on the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, we're going to bring down stretch down an imaginary chut towards the west, Bad Yamo Kainus, and that's going to be the southern boundary of the Mediterranean. Menachut Lefnim is Eretz Yisrael, Umenachut Ulachutz is Chutz La'aretz. Okay. So we have here another diagram to explain and illustrate the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa. And what you'll see is Tur Amnon to your right. And right below it, you'll see on this diagram Kifluria, which is that city that is on top of Tur Amnon. And then we're going to draw a line towards the Euchaidus, the Atlantic Ocean. And then you'll have a bunch of cities that are either on one side of a chut or on the other side of the chut. Now, these two lines go across the Mediterranean towards the west, all the way towards the Atlantic. So, for example, we're going to see this imaginary chut, which is stretched from Kifluria until the Atlantic, and from Nachal Mitzrayim until the Atlantic, and anything within is considered Eretz Yisrael. Now we can reconcile the two brisos. They're both talking about a get that was written on a boat, which is floating on the top of the Yam HaGadol on the Mediterranean, and Mul Eretz Yisrael. However, if you go beyond that chut that we stretched between Turi Amnon to Nachal Mitzrayim, and inside those chutim that take you all the way to the Okainus, to the Atlantic. So the brisa that says that when you bring a get from a boat, it's as if you brought it from Chutz La'aretz, that brisa reflects the sheet of the Chachamim, that anything that's on the other side of the chut is Chutz La'aretz. But the brisa that says that these the get written on that boat is as if it was in Eretz Yisrael, that brisa reflects Shita Rabbi Yehuda, that any location that's in the Yam, in the Mediterranean, and it's Mul Eretz Yisrael, has the status of Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara asks, Rabbanan, Hai ugvul my avdibe. What do they do with that extra superfluous word ugvul? And the Gemara answers, Mi boile l'nisin. The Chachamim derive from that extra word that all the islands that are inside, on the Pnimi side of that chut, that is stretched down from Turi Amnon all the way down to Nachal Mitzrayim in the south, they're all considered Eretz Yisrael. Because if not for the extra word ugvul, we would have said that the Sfas Hayam, even though it's not in a straight line, nevertheless, it is the Gvul. And any islands that are in the sea itself have the status of Chutz La'aretz. So the Gemara asks Rabbi Yehuda, how does he know that the islands that are between these chutim have the status of Eretz Yisrael? And the Gemara answers that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Nisan lo tzrichi kroi. We don't need a pasuk to teach me the status of these islands because they're inside the bounds of Eretz Yisrael. Whereas according to the Chachamim, we need a pasuk to teach me that we shouldn't make a mistake and say that the Sfas Hayam, right, the shoreline is the boundary of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore all the islands are considered Chutz La'aretz. Now the Gemara is going to continue to discuss Kedushas Eretz Yisrael as far as Mitzvos Hatulis Ba'aretz. And the Gemara is going to focus now on Syria, otherwise known as Aram Tzova, which was conquered by David HaMelech for his own purposes in Shmuel Bey's Perek Ches, and also mentioned in Tehillim Kapitel Samach. The conquering of Syria by David is called Kibush Yachid. And the Gemara is going to explain why. And as far as the status of Kibush Yachid, whether it does generate Kiddush Eretz or not, we have a controversy between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf Aleph. According to the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, Kibush Yachid lav shmei Kibush. And it does not generate Kedushas Eretz Yisrael on that area that was conquered, Kibush Yachid. According to Rabbi Meir, on the other hand, Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush, and there's a Chalos Kedushas Eretz Yisrael through Kibush Yachid. Now, the sugya is going to deal with a case of an owner, an Adon who owns an Eved, and he sells him from Eretz Yisrael to Syria, because we have halach that you're not allowed to leave Osalotzeis Eretz Chutz La'aretz unless you're going to study Torah or to marry a woman. And as a result of this Isa, the Chacham made a Gzera, which is later on in the Masechet on Daf Mem Gimel, that an Eved Knani who's living in Eretz Yisrael and his Adon sells him to Chutz La'aretz, meaning to someone who buys the Eved and lives in Chutz La'aretz, then the Eved goes free. And the reason for that is that an Eved has the same status of Chiyuv Mitzvah as an Isha, and when you sell him, you are forcing the Eved to violate the Isha of Yitzir L'Chutz La'aretz. Rabbi Meir Omer, Ako Ke'eretz Yisrael, that's a quote from our Mishnah as far as Gittin is concerned. Boi minei mi Rab Chiya bar Abba, what's the din of a mocher avdo l'Suria? He sells his Eved Knani to a person who lives in Syria. Is it kemocher b'chutz la'aretz dami? Is it as if he sold his Eved to someone who lives in chutz la'aretz, and if he goes lecherus, according to Chachamim, that imposed a fine, a punitive measure on the buyer that is taking the Eved Knani into chutz la'aretz. And again, as we said before, because an Eved has the status of an Isha, as far as mitzvah is concerned, he's not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz. Oh, lo. Or should we say, no, the sale to Syria is not like a sale to chutz la'aretz. Amar lahu Rab Chiya bar Ab responds to Nisua. We could derive this from the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer Ako Ke'eretz Yisrael Gittin, that somebody brings a get from Ako to Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbi Meir, he does not require b'fanei nechta. Legittin in. Why did Rabbi Meir emphasize that this halach in Gittin, la'avadim lo, as far as mechiras avadim, Ako is not considered Eretz Yisrael. That means if a person sells his Eved from Eretz Yisrael to Ako, then the Eved goes free. The Kolshkeit, Surya Demrach Katuva, how much more so Surya, which is much further away towards the north. It has the status of Chutz La'aretz, and somebody who sells his Eved to Syria, the Eved goes free. And now we're going to learn a sugya of Tumas Eretz Amni. The Chachamim saw that Goyim in Chutz La'aretz were being mezalzel. They were careless about the burial of a nefel, a stillborn, and wherever they found a place, they would just bury the stillborn. So the Rabbanim made a gzera on the afar. The status of the afar of Chutz La'aretz is tomei, because they're afraid of an etzem kisaora that would be there. And this tomb is called Tumas Eretz Amim. So there are three takonos with regard to this gzera. Number one, the Gemara, as we'll see in Masechet Shabbos Yudalad Amud Beis, explains that at the beginning of the Tkufa of Bayis Sheni, they made a gzera. And who's they? That's Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzreida and Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yushalayim. That Tumas Eretz Amim is, it means that Truma that comes in contact with the offer of Eretz Amim is Tmei Misafek. It would not be burnt. Only Truma Tmei Vadois is burnt. Then the Gemara later on in Shabbos, on Daf Tesvav, establishes that 80 years before the Churban, the Chacham added in that generation another Gzer of Tumah on the Avir of Eretz Am, not just on contact with the Ofar. And once again, it's a Tumas suffix. So Tumas Ofar is called Tumas Gusha, and the Avir is called Tumas Avira. Now, a few years after the Churban, during the period in which Rav Gamliel served as the Nasi, they added a third Gzera in Usha, that Tumas Ofar Eretz Amim is not a Tumas suffix, but rather Tumah Vadois, and Truma that comes in contact with the Ofar of Eretz Amim is Nisrefes, it would be burnt like Tumah Vadois, like Truma Tmei Vadois. Tumas Avir of Eretz Amim still remains a Tumas suffix, and we don't burn the Truma. And we're going to try to clarify in this sugya what's the Tumas Avir of Eretz Amim. In other words, is it a Tumas Oel, like a person or a Kli for that matter, that is in the Avir of Eretz Amim, and he's Mahil on the Offer of Eretz Amim, he becomes Tomei, Midin Tumas Oel, or the Avir itself is Tomei, even if he's not Mahil on the Offer. Tanurabanan. We learned in a Brisa, B'shlosha Drachim Shavsa Surya li Eretz Yisrael. Surya has the same status as Eretz Yisrael B'shlosha, but with regard to three other aspects, then its status is equal to Chutz La'aretz. And Simon, if you want a mnemonic device, is Ayin Beis, which is Ofar and Eved, Beis Reish, which is Mevi Get and Maser, and Reish Kuf is Tara and Konis Sodom. So first, the Brisa lists those aspects of Surya that have the status of Chutz La'aretz. Afara Tomei Ki Chutz La'aretz. So Surya has Tumas Eretz Amim like Chutz La'aretz. Hamocha Avdol Surya Kimocha B'Chutz La'aretz. If you sell your Eved Kanani to Surya, he goes free. And Mevi Get Mi Surya Ki Mevi Mi Chutz La'aretz. So a get that was written in Surya and it was brought by a shliach to Eretz Yisrael has the status of a get that was brought from Chutz La'aretz, and the shliach is required to say Fanei Nechta, Ubishlosha Eretz Yisrael. But in three dimensions, three dinim, Surya has the status of Eretz Yisrael. Number one, Chayeves b'maser b'shvius Eretz Yisrael. As far as Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, le'inyan mitzvah tluyos ba, it is considered Eretz Yisrael. And a rotzal ikonis labitara nichnas, there's a possibility of entering into Surya without contracting the tomb of Eretz Amim, which is not true in the rest of Chutz La'aretz, as the Gemara is going to explain. And number three, akona sada b'Surya kikona b'farvare Yerushalayim. And we're going to explain that later on.